Good morning. Welcome to the course Dealings in Land. This is a course that deals with conveyancing practices and all kinds of dealings that we will conduct with land in this course. As an introduction, the fundamental difference between the Deets and the Torrance system is important. Under the Deets system, it was a very cumbersome process as each deed had to be scrutinized and meticulously looked at before a transaction could be transferred into the name of the other person. However, under the Torrance system, all that a person has to look at is basically the title that is facing him, i.e. his title that he's holding in the hand. Whose name is on the title? That is the person he is dealing with, and the subject matter in the title together with a description of the property. The purchaser is not bound to go behind the register, so to speak, to see how Mr. A came about this title. Mr. A could have obtained the title fraudulently, Mr. A could have obtained the title by forgery, but that is not the purview of the purchaser. What the purchaser has to do is to satisfy himself, number one, that Mr. A is the owner. You have a look at the IC or the passport, as the case may be, and number two, that he is dealing with Mr. A and not any other person purportedly trying to be Mr. A. So the land transactions in Malaysia, for example, under this course, we are looking at dealings with the land in relation to sale and purchase. We will not be looking at charges and other dealings that can be conducted on the land, but we are focusing on sale and purchase between the individual and an individual buyer, individual seller, and we are focusing on the individual getting a property from a housing developer. Therefore, the land transactions in Malaysia we will be considering in this case takes three aspects, which is the pre-contract stage, the post-contract period, and registration. Okay, in terms of the contract and focusing on the pre-contract stages, it is very important under the Torrance system because it is a system of title by registration. In other words, a person only obtains title after the registration is completed. So we are not looking very much into concepts like equitable title, beneficial title, or beneficial purchaser. So under the Land Code, Section 89 clearly says it is registration that vests and divests title. So how do we go about this? Because when we talk about registration being the ultimate, as a purchaser, I have the money, but I'm not letting go of my money until I'm certain that I will get the property. The vendor, on the other hand, he's not going to let go of his property until he gets the money. He's not giving the title. So we have reached a block. How do we get out of this block situation? This is where we find that in the Torrance system, it is imperative that we appoint a stakeholder. Who is a stakeholder? What does he do? What his roles are, his duties and responsibility, we will look at in another lecture. But for the time being, the first thing that we will do is a stakeholder. Then, once the contract is signed, but before registration, what is the protection for the parties? What about the purchaser? How will he protect his interests? His contract has been signed and he has paid 10% as deposit. What are the duties and obligations of the vendor? This is where we will find that you will find the answer in section 206 subsection 3 of the National Land Code. Under this section, the purchaser is given what is called a contractual right. He has a right under a statutory provision to an enforceable contract as against the vendor. So another aspect is, of course, a purchaser is also entitled to enter a private caveat. This will be under section 323 of the National Land Code, because a purchaser in this case is claiming an unregistered interest in the land which will ultimately be capable of registration. So the parties, they are governed by contract. The purchaser can protect his right by the entry of a private caveat, and he is also entitled to protection under contract, i.e., he can pursue an action for specific performance of the contract, and the vendor is bound to ensure that he does not deal with the land in any way as to deprive a purchaser of this right. During this period of the time after the contract has been executed, but before registration, the following things need to be done. There has to be a title search to make sure that the title is free of encumbrances. The vendor is not subject to any bankruptcy proceedings, or any other interests are registered onto the land. The search will reveal all of this. Once done, next is the execution of the documents, the memorandum of transfer, which will have to be signed by both the vendor and the purchaser in the presence of the attorney. After that, stamping of the documents will be done, and presentation of documents and payment for registration. For presentation, please refer to section 295 of the National Land Code, as this clearly tells you the effective date of registration. It begins with the presentation, entry of the into the presentation book, and finally we have registration.